Is property development still profitable?
It is. I always say it's like having three of you in a marriage. There's you, the property, and then there's the bigger, wider market. The market is the temperamental bit. You never know what it's going to do. I nearly folded on the day the credit crunch happened back in 2008. And to make matters worse,
Rachael Troughton is a property investor, mentor, and podcast host who's built and renovated a high-performing portfolio from buy-to-let to listed buildings. Through her Solopreneur Business School, she helps investors skip cookie-cutter strategies and build focused, profitable property businesses that fit their lifestyle.
You help people launch their property development business, not their property development hobby.
yes, I do. It allows you to give something back to society. But I've got clients who will only rent out houses to the prison service. So when people come out of prison, they've got somewhere to go and live until they can build their lives. So he rents his buildings to the charities. People always assume that property is a one-way.
Rachel, how do I make tons of money with property development whilst having fun doing it? How do I do that?
Well, how to do those two things together is to understand that first and foremost, it's a business. But secondly, every single bit of that business can be enormous fun. So who doesn't like looking at their bank account and seeing it grow for a start? Secondly, who doesn't like actually getting your hands dirty, but not getting your hands dirty in that you go on site, you wear all the kit, but you're not the one actually doing the work. And secondly, the more you do it, the better you get at it, the more exciting it can be, because you can start to see a property and go, oh, that's going to do this, that, and the other. And that's what's going to happen to it long term. And that should make me. Who wouldn't want to do that?
I'm going to go straight for the goal here. I know that's proper English, but you get me.
I do, yes.
Is property development still profitable today?
Yes, it is. But you have to, the market, as you're referring to, the market moves and changes. And I always say it's like having three of you in a marriage, really. There's you, the property, and then there's the bigger, wider market. The market is the temperamental bit. You never know what it's going to do. So you just have to be constantly aware of problems that could occur, and you head them off at the pass before you start. So if you are doing this for the long term, property isn't short term. If you're flipping, you are still talking 6 to 12 months by the time you get in to get out. Someone like me, who's been in it 20 years, and my clients who are looking for long term, where do I want to be in 20 years? I can afford to do things slowly. I can afford to make sure that I'm not doing hundreds of things at once. Now, it's very tempting to do lots of things simultaneously. We all like to think we can multitask, but I nearly just folded on the day the credit crunch happened. Do you remember back in 2008? Because I thought I was doing incredibly well. At that point, I had a portfolio creating wonderful cash flow. I was building 4 houses, and I had a little block of flats that I was building at the same time. And I had 2 little houses that I was renovating, which were going into my portfolio. Cash flow was great. Everything was happening. And then the credit crunch happened. And overnight, my properties lost a third of their value. Just like that, wiped off the books. And to make matters worse, both my husband and my build team, my husband was army, they were territorial, all got somewhere hot and sandy. So I suddenly had no one on site either. So disaster struck. And that is the kind of thing that you have to be totally aware of in property, is what can go wrong. So what's my plan B? And people in property have endless, if this, then that sort of scenarios. So you literally get up in the morning and go, oh no, what a nightmare. This has happened. Right. What's my plan B? What can I do now? So if you can't sell something, you're going to have to rent it out. How long for, who to? And it is that. It's flowcharts.
So it's basically you have a probability tree. Yeah. This happens, then this, and that. If that happens, then I need to make sure of this, and that. Isn't it draining?
Yeah, it's very tempting because you've got multiple problems that can occur. And the biggest one is finance. If you're new to property, you look at all the finance numbers and you go, oh, I only want to borrow money for, a year because I don't want to waste that extra income on the interest and things like that. But actually 18 months makes you safe. because when Mrs. Market comes in and does something to you, you know that you've got that extra time to be able to get out of the problem and pay everything back, incur extra costs. So it is about learning how to take risk, but calculated risk.
Back when I was living in Belgium for about 3 years and a half, beginning of 2020 up until mid 2023, I had Belgian friends who were building their house, right? That's typically the age you do this at.
Yes.
And at some point, between the time you would get a quote from a contractor and the delivery of the raw materials, prices literally tripled, which led to a phenomenon where contractors weren't giving quotes anymore, or they were giving quotes for like the cost of service, but not the cost of materials, which could go from simple to triple. When you're in such context, is it also a matter of like, if this, then that? Because that just kills your whole margin on a project like this. So how do you manage that?
There is a difference between building for yourself in a domestic situation, in which case it's a real sort of complete nightmare, or you are doing it as a business and a profit. During that period you were talking about, we were doing a build on our wedding venue, converting that. When we sat down with our contractors, with our build team and everyone else, they were flagging up already that they could see stuff starting to increase.
Interesting.
End user, we just said, right, how much currently does this stuff cost? We will buy in everything you need in the next 2 weeks. So we were able to store it because we had the facility to do so. Everything we needed for a 9-month project. So it was all paid up all front, and that was fine. For those who couldn't, you then have to have a contingency, and it can be quite high. And sometimes you just have to go, is this worth it? Do I really need to do this project now? I will actually sell the project. I'll make a smaller profit, but I'm clear, I'm ready to go again.
That actually makes a lot of sense.
Yes, but the problem is Mr. Ego, very difficult. If you're loving a project and you can see what's going to be, the temptation to go, oh, well, it'll go away. And the truth of the matter is there will always be another exciting project that you'll love doing. So you've got to let some go to someone else, make a profit out of. I
get you. In French, we would say putting your head in the sand,
Yes, like an ostrich.
Flamingos. Oh, yeah, no, that's ostrich. You're right. I don't even get my animals right. Where you're just like, put your hand in the sand. I don't want to see, I don't want to hear. And then you get out and prices have tripled and you lost money.
Yes, but France I have worked in France.
Here we go.
With a build team. So I had a house in France and it needed a new roof. I brought my English build team, because I ran a building company, to do the bulk of the house, but the locals know the different types of pitches and all that kind of thing, because depending on where you are in France, what your roof looks like. Bearing in mind, this was 20 years ago. We were absolutely amazed to discover the way builders build is very different in France. I know the rules have changed now. Back then, we were actually contracted to supply the lunchtime bottle of wine. Which we thought was absolutely hilarious.
Yep.
Happily, we just had to make sure we had the right numbers of red and the right numbers of white.
Indeed, it's important.
Absolutely. Actually, when we looked at it, there were other things that the French build team looked at our English ones and went, why have they got that written into their contract? Absolutely amazing. So it is about knowing local habits. They vary all over England as well. So, not that they drink wine, it'd be more likely to be beer and never when you're on duty. But, there are always little things that you can build into all the reports that you're doing with them.
I'm just going to, put the little asterisk here. They're not on duty if they are on lunch break. That's how it is in France.
That's very true, but they will be if they're up a ladder after lunch. Then they will be.
That is so true. That is so true. But so I think I'm not that much in the construction world, so I wouldn't know. But my first job was prepping chicken in cold rooms, whatever. The lunchtime was we all have a glass of wine and potentially even a little apéro before that.
Very sensible.
And it's like, how can you expect to be 100% productive after that? Like, you cannot. Customs, as you say, have
it's
their
customs, way. Absolutely. Yes.
There we go.
Yeah.
Can't fight that. And I feel this is very good context for when we're going to talk about your podcast, Rachel, Property Solopreneur. But before that, I'd like to close the loop with what's the key business principle when doing property? If you had to summarize all this, what is it?
The key business principle is a business. It's got to make profit.
Right.
And if it isn't making a profit, it's a hobby. And the problem with property is that people can get completely transfixed on whether they're a rose curb appeal, what sort of house it is. Actually, it's numbers. That's all there is to it. That's the principle. Do the numbers work? Have you done your spreadsheet?
So that is the perfect introduction. So Property Solopreneur, tell me about this. What is that?
Well, it's quite interesting because I think most people don't realise they are a solopreneur. They bumble along doing their own thing on their own way. And it's only when they start to scale and they want to do more than one project at once that they've only got so many hours in the day, and what's going to give. And certainly here in England, there is a big industry on property education, and you can go along and pay very large sums of money to be property educated. But however, the man standing at the front of the stage, he may have a property portfolio worth 20 to 30 million, but he'll have 80 members of staff. So when he turns around and says, you do this and you take this number of phone calls a day and you do this number of viewings in a week and blah, blah, blah. And if you are a solopreneur, you will hear these numbers coming towards you and just go, whoa, I can't do that. So I had built a portfolio by the time I encountered this industry of teaching. And I started to work with people who were going, I'm overwhelmed. How do I make 100 phone calls when I'm at work? And I'd be going, no, you're a solopreneur. The rules are different. This is what you have to do. And so that is why I started my podcast, because I was going, I don't want people to be discouraged. The great thing is, as a solopreneur, I've been in this 25 years. If I had only bought and worked on 2 buildings a year, and sometimes I did lots, sometimes I did none, in that time, I could have had 50 buy-to-let properties of varying sorts in a portfolio.
Right.
That is quite a large number.
It is.
Yet 2 a year is a tiny number. But 2 a year is actually really quite sustainable for the average person who perhaps is still at work. So I wanted to encourage people. You don't have to start off in January of your first year. And if you haven't got 10 buildings in your portfolio by the end of that year, that you are a failure. No, you're probably actually in a better position than the person who's just gone out and thrown money at the problem and bought all sorts of things or in all sorts of places and not really have a tight control of what's going on and what's coming into the bank.
So why the podcast? Why not a YouTube channel? Why not phone calls and calling people to tell them, hey, start property development?
It's very simple because in a previous existence, I'd worked with the British Army in a communication role. And somebody once said to me, because I used to be with their radio systems, you've got a great face for radio. That was something that I knew I could do. I did lots of that, was quite happy. And also, I've always lived in buildings quite difficult to light. This was built in 1490. So I've actually had to build a little sort of bit inside it so I get the light right and things like that. And I thought, podcasts, literally, I did have that discussion with myself, podcasts, what are the pros, what are the cons? One of them was I didn't have to have great lighting. Secondly, it's really easy to get a good sound system going. That's fine, I could do that. And secondly, I'm a listening person. So I was convent educated and I was always told that the devil makes work for idle hands. So if I am sitting looking at you, my hands aren't doing anything. So I'm not... The thought process was, I ought to be doing something else at the same time, in which case I'm not really taking in what I'm seeing. But a podcast going in the ears, I could be washing up, I could be driving my car, I could be mowing the lawn, all these things. Suddenly I had a much bigger percentage of people who could listen and hear what I was trying to tell them. So that's why I did a podcast. So
you're doing audio only?
Well, I was at the beginning, and then I found Marvellous Riverside, and suddenly life changed dramatically. Things improve all the time, but I'm literally not recording at the second apart from external ones because I'm having a jaw operation, and it's never going to be a good look on screen, is it? Half your jaw sort of sewn up, really.
I wonder if that would have an impact. I mean, for sure, but it's interesting. Because at the end of the day, what matters is that people can relate to it, right? And yes. I mean, it makes you human after all. But yes, I understand that you might not want to display this.
Yeah, call me girly.
So you launched the podcast. What's the objective? Is it purely to educate people and, basically give back to the property development industry and wannabe property developers? What's the objective behind it for you, Rachel?
I had been part of a team. I co-hosted something called the Bucks Property Meet, which was a monthly property meeting in the evening when we had sort of 50 to 70 people turn up. So I knew the industry, who my audience was. And I also want to develop my mentoring system, and find a new audience and find new people to work with me. Because average people work with you in property for about a year. And then hopefully I don't see them again because they should be, succeeding. So that was my idea behind it. And then I launched a couple of ways of working with me, which do feed off my podcast. And yes, it did everything I wanted to do. And the other thing I really enjoyed about it is I do have quite a distinctive voice. I know that. I would go to a property meeting somewhere in England, sit down, wouldn't say anything, to begin with. I would find who was around, chatter away. And somebody on the table would go, "Oh, my word, I know exactly who you are. I've heard your podcast."
Boom.
And I loved that. That was that. I'm afraid, bit of an ego boost. Yes, loved it.
For sure. It's an ego stroke. I get that. It's so funny you'd mentioned this because that's not when I figured out the power of podcast, because I knew a little bit earlier, but when I went to my first conference in the first industry I was in, and somebody tapped on my shoulder and was like, "Guillaume Jouvencel," and I had no clue who that person was. And they told me, "Yeah, you're the host of Corporate Issue 101, right?" I was like, "Yes." And you're like,
as if, oh, somebody's listened.
Exactly. But you know this, but it's so, I'm curious to have your feel about this, but you get 200, 300, 400 people to tune in every episode, right?
Yep.
This is so many people on one hand and so little people on the other hand. You're thinking millions of downloads for Joe Rogan and so on. At the end of the day, when you picture yourself in an amphitheater with like 300 people in front of you, this is a whole other feeling. And you're like, but those are real people listening to you. And if your retention rate is good, it means people listen to you for like 45, 60 minutes in a row every week.
Every week.
This has an impact.
Yeah, it does. And it has an impact because they get to know your voice. And one of the things that I find when people then go onto my website, book a discovery call because they fancy sort of seeing whether or not they're going to work with me. And I come on the Zoom discovery call and they go, "Oh my word, you sound exactly the same as you do on your podcast." Yes, that's the phrase exactly which comes to my mind every time. But it is very true. People assume you're not real to a certain degree. And when you then link up to them and you're talking to them on a Zoom and it's one-to-one suddenly, you've already broken down a lot of barriers because they've heard you talk. You've been in their space. You've been in their ears. And it makes the connection so much easier.
I love this. So talk to me a bit about your business behind it. What is it you do? You just mentioned people book calls with you, right? Discovery calls to see if they're going to work with you or not. What is it that you do, Rachel?
I work with people property and business owners, predominantly solopreneurs, who want to run a business that actually works for them, because you can fall into property by accident, i.e. you buy a house and then you have to move and you then let it out and you become an accidental landlord. Or you get into property and you, seduced by all the numbers and the excitement and the fun and all the rest of it, you don't actually set up a business. And in property, we also have these things called shiny pennies, which occur every year, which is the new way to make money. And it's always promoted heavily and it's very sexy, isn't it? Fun and it's for everybody. And if you're not doing it that way, then you're doing something wrong and all that kind of thing. But actually, yes, it may make money for that person at the front of the stage, but it may not suit you. And so what I do with people is if I'm doing a strategy session with them, it's just either a full day or a half day. Yes, it's about property and yes, it's about business, but actually it's about you. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What are you really bad at? How much time have you got to put into this business? What's your finances? Property it's a lie to say you can get in with no money. You need some, or you need to have the ability to be a money magnet. And in property, people do lend you money who you don't know. We'll say, I've had someone come up to me, they'd listened to my podcast, people who knew me, had worked with me, and literally they approached me and said, "I've got 200 grand. Would that be enough to work with you?" Yeah, well, absolutely, quite right.
We'll figure something out.
Yes,
I need to check my books, but
But, the thing is that I know what kind of property I want to work with because it suits me. I'm not hands-on. I don't manage tenants. Tenants and I do not agree. So I always have an intermediary. I know that I don't want to do very high-end HMOs. I do student HMOs. I know what students do to my properties. I'm quite comfortable with that. At the end of the day, when I'm working with people, you could go and do all those fun, amazing, high, sexy stuff, but you actually hate people. You hate tech. You hate this, you hate that. Here are the bits you're good at. Let's build a business round property business, round the stuff that you feel really comfortable with. Allows you to get up in the morning and go, yes, I'm going to go and see the estate agent, or I'm going to go online if you're an introvert and just look up what's for sale. What type of business suits your personality type? And then you'll make money because you'll love doing it.
If I were to summarize this, Rachel, you help people launch their property development business, not their property development hobby.
Yeah, I do. And then, of course, also the other problem is that sometimes you're a few years in, perhaps, and you suddenly realize you're doing something wrong. So they come and have something called a 90-minute power session with me, where we only focus on that one problem. Now, sometimes that can be about systems and processes, just number crunching and what kind of spreadsheets or tech you need, because there's lots of lovely tech in property. Is it because you want to be able to go on into a property room or into a room where there are lots of millionaires and find people listening to you and going, I want to lend you money? So, for instance, one of my clients is almost non-existent on social media. He's allergic to social media, but he plays paddle. I don't know if you have paddle in France. You probably do. He's frightfully good at paddle, loves it, won't miss a session. And out of paddle, he found a client who just said, I've been listening to you. I really like what you did. I've been to one of your open days, seen your properties. Would you like my money? I've got probably 1.2 million a year to lend to you, but you've got to...
Do not even finish the question. Would that? Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
100%.
And that's, for instance, what we spent some time working on. Was he ready for that moment when somebody said that, for him to go, yes, of course. And here's the system. Here's the process. Here's the paperwork I need you to work with. Here are the laws behind this. But there are regulations. But how do you make yourself? How do you make yourself ready for basically turning the light bulb on so that people know you're available for and what they can do with you? That was one session. It might be something infinitely more tedious about, okay, I've got lots of tenants who aren't paying my rent. How do I get out of that? What systems do I need to use?
Back to your point around shiny penny, Rachel, which I love. I'm going to borrow this. When you mentioned this, I immediately made the link with, so as you get into marketing, right, and if you play a bit the social media game, which I am, you see anybody can claim anything nowadays on the internet. It's like, hey, make millions in a year with trading. And then it's drop shipping, and then it's selling an online course, and then it's building a community. Now it's implementing AI for businesses. And you see all those people saying like, yeah, I make 240 grand a month just implementing AI for small businesses, whatever. I feel that this is a curse property development for sure has to live with as well.
Oh, yes.
How do you filter through the noise and make sure that people trust you, see you, consider you as an authority? Does the podcast play a role into this? Like, how do you work on this?
I also go and talk in the evenings or during the day at property meetings. You'll probably have a theme for the evening and two speakers, and I'll do one and somebody else will do the other. And you have lots of question and answer sessions. And it is really useful. I know what I stand for. I know my values. I know who I'll work with and who I won't. And I will be quite happy to say so. So I'll get a question, for instance, which is the most common is, well, X, who's very big, all over the social media. He always says, never sell a building, never pay down a mortgage, interest. And I will go, well, I don't believe in that. And I don't believe in that for the following reasons. And my reasons resonate with people who are working on their own and who don't have huge sums of money to begin with, or who know that when they are 50 or 60, they want to retire with no mortgages, but with a lovely lump sum of money coming in every single month through rental properties. And that being in a room where they've already know a little bit about me and me being prepared to say, no, I don't believe that's right, or this is what I believe in very firmly and can back it up with evidence, that helps enormously with why people want to work with you.
So you started this a bit as a solopreneur, right? But then, and I think you mentioned this when you were working on the house in France, you have a whole team in England that you literally moved from England to France just for that one.
I did then, yes, I don't now. And that was because that was very interesting. Again, very easy when you start out to replicate what you've seen in a workplace you've worked in as thinking that is the only way you can run a business. You have to have a team in-house. You have to do this. You have to do that. So I set up this renovations company and I took them around the south of England and to France. But most of my time was spent basically in HR. sorting out somebody. There was always a plumber going missing, or a brickie had disappeared. I just thought, this is ridiculous. And then, of course, you are dealing with the team, but you're also dealing with your customer who's going to pay you money. And there can be a lot of customers who don't pay money. So again, I thought the risk there is too much. So I shut that down. But as a solopreneur, you do have to find really good teams of people, usually run by other people who you can subcontract to. So I use the same man if I'm doing a build up here in Suffolk. He will come and do the project managing. I don't need to do that. I outsource to him. But he's got a set of rules and regulations that he works to, and he is very professional. So that works. I can't do everything. So there are certain things in property that I will have a collection of people around me. Lawyers are that, for instance. There are more lawyers than you can possibly imagine, different types. And you can't use one type for certain types of building. But interestingly, they go off the boil when they work with you for about 18 months to 2 years. They might go off to have a baby. They might change. So you're constantly having to find new people to work with who are going to continue to work to your level and standards.
That does make sense. But then tell me, Rachel, how much money do I need to get started in property development then?
It is a piece. How long is a piece of string, as we say in England? So
I didn't know that one.
It really depends on what you're doing. So if I have someone who's really keen to work in property but has no money, they've got two options. They can either borrow money through the bank, and again, or a person. Banks usually help people who haven't done anything beforehand, and that so depends on the market. I was lucky when I was first starting. Credit crunch hadn't happened, and I had an open line of credit with my bank. So I could go to an auction, I could ring them the next morning and go, "Oh, such an exciting night last night. I bought a house." And my bank manager would say, "Right, okay, how much money do you need in your bank in 28 days' time?" And that's when I'd have to pay for it. And I'd tell him, okay. Now, that's very difficult to get now, but you can get there by saying what you need to do is get to grips with the basics. You could property source, which is when you go and find the deals, you build up a network of investors on one side who will either buy the deals off you or do joint ventures with you. Or, you then start to find them for yourself, and they're really good ones, and you then go out and looking for the funding. So there are ways around it, but it won't be fast.
Yeah.
But there's also another saying in England that the quickest way to make a small fortune is to start with a big one.
Okay. Sounds easier said than done, but go ahead.
Absolutely, which means that you start all guns blazing and you watch it go off the cliff before it starts to climb again. So for those who haven't got heaps of money at the beginning, but know they want to build a big portfolio or whatever it is they want to do, I said, don't be discouraged. It's just going to take you a little longer than someone who knows they've got the deposit now for property 1 and property 2. I started the whole thing with, I had a car, it's an BMW X5. I sold it. And with that £23,000 profit I'd made, because it was tax-free at the time, I bought my first house.
Nice.
And I only meant to buy one. But once I'd done it and I'd remortgaged it and I realised what was there, I thought, hang on, I can do this again. And so you take that money out and you buy the next house and you refurbish it and you then revalue it and you get it refinanced. Then you take the same £23,000 and you buy the next house. So one set of £23,000 could buy you 5 or 6 houses.
Are you saying that I should invest in real estate rather than expensive luxurious cars?
Luxury cars don't get you anywhere. No, that's a depreciating asset as opposed to an appreciating asset, which is property.
Amen. But that's a nice ego stroke, though. I have the latest X5.
I hate to tell you, I can recognise a Mini, I can recognise an Aston Martin, but not a lot in the middle.
I recognize the British vibe from this. Fair enough. That does make sense. Okay, so what are you saying then? You can start with literally no money. It will just take more time.
Yes.
You can start with a little bit of money. It will just mean that you will need to do one operation at a time. And then as you compound, you can do more. Or you can start with 1.2 million per annum and go all guns blazing right from the get-go. Basically, it's for anybody.
I think the long term, it starts slowly. Because it's not called the construction industry, the building industry, for nothing. It's an industry. And people have qualifications. You don't need any qualifications to be a property investor or to develop property.
Which is kind of crazy, actually.
Yeah, it is to a certain degree. What you've got to do as the individual who wants to make money is to educate yourself in a phenomenal number of spheres and do it quite fast and be prepared to learn and to be humble. I think a lot of people, particularly highly educated people, value book learning above all else.
Yeah.
Your average builder struggles to read and write. I mean, I remember my first invoice that I got from my builder was written on the back of a torn off cement bag. I paid it. My accountant was happy. It all worked. He could do sums, mental arithmetic, faster than I could get my calculator out of my pocket. I think VAT at that point was 17.5%. And if I said to him, okay, what's the price of this? He could take the cost, add the 17.5%, just like that. And I was still going, oh, hang on a second,
Let me double check that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so consequently, I straight away realised that no, he didn't have an O level to his name. But he had an understanding and experience that I could not get in a month of Sundays. Mm-hmm. And if I needed to understand how this whole thing worked, I just had to learn from him. So I spent a lot of time. My question to him always was, what would your suggestion be? How would you do this? How can I solve this? Because I was the funding partner, basically. And he would say, well, you've got three choices here, Rachel, A, B or C. Which one are you going to go for?
Yeah.
And that many educated people will walk onto a building site or whatever and go, well, I'm the big one here. A, I've got the money. And B, have you seen how many letters I've got after my name? And you've got nothing and you can barely speak English either. And, that's the problem. And you get everyone's back up. Whereas I was so lucky because I could play so many cards, the dumb blonde, I could play the girly card, I could do everything. And so consequently, no one minded how stupid my questions were. And I asked an awful lot of them. But I learnt so much. And when you work with a team who know that if you've asked a question once and you've listened and you've done what they suggest and it's worked, they are really happy to work with you again and again and again. And that's what you want.
I don't have anything else to say to this. I mean, I think this is just golden nuggets of truth. Whether that's property development or any business endeavors, really. Like, there is no stupid questions.
The other thing is that with property, there are so many different parts you can work in and play with, so to speak, because one of the things I really encourage people is to build businesses of property businesses. So, I'm sitting on my farm at the moment.
Interesting.
When my husband came out of the army, we took over the family farm and we had 14 unused buildings, all of which can't be used basically for agriculture now because our machinery is far, far too big. You can't get a large John Deere tractor into something that is only 6 foot high. So we had to find new ideas of working with things. And one of them was turning it into a wedding venue. But you see, then you get profit in the wrong place and you're going to be taxed on it in a way that you weren't anticipating. So you have to then create the wedding venue business that rents your property business from the farm so that your profit is in a different place to where the farming industry is. So again, need a jolly good accountant. And I love my accountant. He comes and spends 2 days every year. Absolutely. He's brilliant. He doesn't always tell me what I want to hear. That's the other thing. I like a person who calls a spade a spade. So I will say, well, I thought I might do this. And I've got a little, I've got a spreadsheet and I've got a business plan for this. And he'll go, well, you could do it that way. But if you do that, you'll incur this kind of tax problem. So where are we going to end up? When you're dead, Rachel, where are we going to end up? That's where we've got to start. How are we disposing of this property or this business?
Interesting.
Because somebody, and it won't be you, will be paying tax. It will be the person who inherits it, or sells it to. So that's where you've got to go. So building businesses off property business is something I particularly enjoy, and so you can get many bites of one business. Now the other thing is that with property you have tenants.
Yeah.
And again, if you niche into different types of tenants, you get different varieties of profit and cash flow back from them. But I like good old simple single lets where I rent to families. No, it's not fun and exciting, really. One of our houses, which admittedly I didn't buy, we inherited it, has had the same tenant for 80 years.
How is that even possible?
He was born in the house. His parents rented it from my in-laws' grandparents.
Okay.
And it's been on the farm ever since then. he will be there forever and a day. And that, to a certain degree, again, you mentioned earlier in this podcast about giving back to society. A lot of people working in property love the fact they get, earns them a good wage, but also it allows you to give something back to society, which gets a bad rap, really. But I've got clients, for instance, who will only rent out houses to the prison service. So when people come out of prison, they've got somewhere to go and live until they can build their lives. So that's his niche. I've got another one who only works will only have tenants who've got mental health problems. So he rents his buildings to the charities that deal with mental health. This is the thing. I had a very interesting conversation, and a great friend is working in something called assisted living, which is you modify your house for people with specific needs, like grab rails or, heating systems that they can't touch and all that kind of thing. It costs a little bit more to do, but you get a tenant who will stay there for 50 years or whatever, and they wouldn't be able to rent normal, straightforward houses. And that gives them as much joy as actually seeing the money go into their bank. And it's really important for them.
That is beautiful.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah, and I'm like, because at the end of the day, when you think about construction and real estate and property development, you attach money to it, necessarily, right? And I'm like, you have those people in your client's portfolio who, well, literally don't make it easier for them. I can only expect that when you rent only to people with mental health issues, your properties will potentially have to sustain certain form of damage or
yes, it will. Yes,
degradations. But that's inspiring.
But once you get your head around the fact that actually even mainstream tenants can cause you a problem, then suddenly, if you want to give back to society, it becomes an easier conversation, and people like that. People always assume that property is a one-way, i.e. profit to you. There are so many things that can go wrong just on the tenant side. So I was thinking about that. And for instance, what kind of problems have we had? Well, we've had the tenant who died. We didn't find him for a couple of days. That was quite tricky. We've had tenants being hit by cars in Latvia and on life support machine, and it took us 6 months to track him down. We knew we weren't getting any rent, but why not? We had no idea. Eventually, it was all sorted out. You've got court cases going on. I once had a tenant who met me by chance because, as I say, tenants and I don't always see eye to eye, and took an instant dislike to me and refused to pay his rent, said that since I was clearly the kind of person I was, I should be paying him. And I had a slight disagreement on that. And literally, he was meant to be moving out the following week, and he had a party over the weekend. And I don't know if you know a program called Doctor Who. Well, Doctor Who. Well, he was a big fan, and he painted life-size Daleks and TARDISes all round the ground floor of my house in this very strong enamel paint, which basically eats into the plasterwork. So not only did he leave, so I had a problem here. I had to sort it out, but I knew I wasn't able to get any money out of him. But all the plaster had to come off the house, and it had to be taken off the market, replastered, and then allowed to dry before I could do anything. And that was his sort of, up yours, you nasty, landlord. To a certain degree, I still talk about it. I still laugh. I think that was the most hilarious session. But as a long-term, investor, that's the kind of thing that happens. That's what I have a reserved amount of money sitting in the bank for, so that when the agent rings up and goes, "Oh, you're never going to believe what's happened to your house," I go, "Oh, what?" And he'll say, "And it's going to cost you whatever." And I go, "Okay, well, how much do you want and when?" Type thing. I've had fires, floods. As I say, this kind of terrible. I've had a drugs bust, more than one drugs bust. Basically, if you rent out to people, you will have every kind of problem you can imagine.
Of course.
Attempted murders, the works. The thing about property is we all think, and all we've done so far is talk about money and bricks and mortar. But if you are holding property that tenants go into, it is actually a people business. Who are you working with and what are you providing for? When you crack the code on that, it's a sweet spot.
I'm going to take a wild guess here. I'm going to say that this tenant who painted the plaster didn't get his deposit back.
No, he didn't. No.
Yeah.
He didn't get his deposit back. I did take him to court for the damages. Now, it took me 10 years to claim back, or because he couldn't afford to pay. Damage he'd done was quite sizable.
Of course.
When you take people to court who don't have a lot of money, the court will side with them. And I think he was made to pay something like £1 a week. A lot of people go, well, what was the point, Rachel? I didn't want him to get away with it. So I took him to court and, it cost me money, but I got some back, so I was happy. And it always makes a fabulous story when I'm talking on stage, because I've got pictures of Daleks and TARDISes sitting in my room. Yeah.
Here we go.
Yeah.
What do you think is still going to be true 10 years from now when it comes to podcasting? Like, what is it that, because obviously this is part of your success, right? Not the whole thing, but part of your success and the success of your company. What do you think will still be true in 10 years from now that people listening to us wanting to get into podcast or already having a podcast and looking for the next thing to grow them? Instead of like, what's going to change? What's going to remain true that we should be focusing on?
But people want to listen. People like having stuff come through their ears. The wireless or the radio has been around for a while, and it was not superseded by television. If you go into the majority of cars, they're listening to stuff. People are listening to stuff around and about when they're walking or whatever. This is an easily available medium. And the other great thing is they can listen again and again and again to the bits they want to listen to without having to use their eyes. They can do other things at the same time. So podcasting it's an extension of radio, and it will be around for a very long time. And the thing about a podcast is you don't need as much bandwidth to listen to a podcast as you to watch something like YouTube or something on the internet. And in some places, the internet and the bandwidth is never going to be good enough to do what you want to do. But you can always get a radio and you can always get a podcast.
Amen to this. I was going to Google the graphic representation of how many people listen to radio to see if it has really evolved or like just, steadily grown. Love this. Last question, Rachel, is... go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, the thing about podcasts is I'm going fishing next week, almost off the end of Scotland, right up north. And I shall be sitting on the riverbank, watching my husband leap around in an icy cold, river, fishing to his heart's content. I'm going to be listening to podcasts outside in the fresh air with my flask of coffee, loving what I'm doing, but I'm listening to somebody else talk. It's great. That's why podcasts work.
What are you listening to?
Oh, a variety of things. The BBC, you see, marvellous institution,
Classic.
has a never-ending source of podcasts. I have two ladies that I listen to a lot in business on podcasts, which I listen to and will hear their newest episodes next week. But otherwise, it'll be a marvellous collection of murder mystery and everything else that the BBC can throw at me.
Fair enough. BBC podcast it is. Rachel, if people want to find out more about you, Property Solopreneur, and what you do, where should they go?
My website, which is racheltroughton.com, and I spell my name RACHAELTROUGHTON. I'm completely available on there. And my podcast, The Property Solopreneur, is available on Apple and on Spotify. So you can't miss me, really.
We'll put all the links in the descriptions. Rachel, thank you so much for coming on Podcast Gurus.
Oh, it's been such fun, hasn't it? I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for asking me.
It was. I loved it. Thank you so much for coming. And I learned so much about property development. And I learned so much about what you can do out of Doctor Who when you have good imagination and a house you want to destroy. So that was great. Thank you so much, Rachel.
Thank you.